Good evening and thank you for joining us on the program. I'm Temple Ashaju. Let's get down straight to business with what we have right now. It's now certain that Nigeria, Africa's economic powerhouse, will soon sign the Continental Free Trade Area Agreement. That's the AFCFTA. Nigeria is seen as a major entity that will play a key role in the trade bloc to its maximum potential. And following the announcement during the week that President Muhammadu Buhari will sign the agreement, analysts across sectors have been pushing publications on the implications of Nigeria's membership for the entire continental market. Agusto & Co. is one of such agencies that have released a research report on the AFCFTA. And their focus is on the impact of the AFCFTA on the Nigerian Stock Exchange. We're joined now by the head of research at Agusto & Co., Jimmy Obobine, who's the anchorman, of course, for those major reports. Good evening, and thank you for joining us on the show.
Thank you very much, Temple.
So let's go straight to business and, of course, look at what you have as the overview for this agreement, the AFCFTA, briefly.
Temple, if you look at the story of Africa, it's a continent, basically, that doesn't like itself and likes foreigners. And if you go back into our history, you hear things like divide and rule, assimilation, right? And for most of the regional economic initiatives we've pursued, it happened right after our independence or sometime after our independence when the level of activism was quite high. But coming into this generation, and if you look at 80s into the 90s, into this new millennium, we haven't pursued any of such initiatives. So this African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement is the first of this generation of leaders, right? Where we're trying to integrate the continent. And Africa does need integration. Let me tell you a simple analogy. Sao Tome is just it's Nigeria's neighboring country, even though we do not know that. It is a neighboring country. If you map it on Google, you'll find out that by air, Nigeria to Sao Tome is meant to be an hour.
A lot of African countries are really like that.
Exactly, it's meant to be an hour. But to get to Sao Tome today from Nigeria, you probably do 7 to 10 hours, and you need about 3 to 4 stopovers for a country which is meant to be 1 hour away from us. The easiest way to get to Sao Tome is by flying to Portugal in Europe, and then from Portugal, you go to Sao Tome, a country right at your border, a country just beside you. Your borders, I mean your borders across your territorial waters, not too far from territorial waters. And this is the story of Africa. So you find out in terms of trade, what Africa does with the rest of the world, especially China and Europe or America, it's much more than what we do between ourselves. And then when we trade between ourselves or amongst ourselves, we tend to call it things like smuggling. So Nigeria and Benin Republic, everything that happens between us, we tend to refer to it as smuggling. And we find it very easy to sign agreements with the big countries of the world. So for instance, we have the African Growth Opportunity Act, which Africa came together, AGOA. We came together and signed with the US. So we never have a problem signing those kinds of agreements.
Right.
But when Africans sit down together around the table and say, let's increase trade amongst ourselves, right? Then we now begin to have all sorts of fear factors. Why those trade agreements?
Why those fear factors? Do you think it's the language barrier? Some francophone countries, some even Espanol, and of course you have a lot of anglophone countries. You think it's language barrier?
You cannot do away with those fears, such that we have anglophone and francophone, whatever that means anyway. But we know these are legacy barriers that were created outside of us. They were created for us, we inherited it, and we've dwelt on these barriers. But why would Nigeria and Cameroon not trade more amongst themselves, between themselves rather? Why wouldn't we?
We've succeeded in having some regional relationship. You have the East African region, you have ECOWAS, and the Central African region are also trying to do some things, the COMESA, I think. But basically, let's look at the resistance level in Nigeria. Why that resistance?
Okay, good. So first, this is the first fear. So you had Organized Labor and Manufacturers Association speaking from the same template. Now that's a fear when Labor and Manufacturers Association are speaking the same language. I think you're more comfortable when they speak opposing language. So what were their fears? One, that Nigeria will become a dumping ground. That was the first major fear. Two, that our manufacturers did not have the ability to compete against other manufacturers from Africa. Are these fears real? Yes, they are. So these issues are actually there. Can our manufacturers compete effectively against other African manufacturers. On the surface, when we look at the structural issues inhibiting manufacturing in Nigeria, especially when you talk about electricity supply, you talk about the port issues, logistic issues, Dangote Sugar reported a 25% dip in revenue year on year in 2018, just on the back of the log jam in Apapa. So when you now begin to have all these kinds of issues, then manufacturers in Nigeria begin to get scared and say to themselves, look, can we actually compete against people who do not have electricity issues, who do not have ports that are largely ineffective like we have, who do not have customs that work against trade, right? And then, so on the surface of it, you say to yourself, no, we can't compete. But that's not the end of the story.
Okay, so let's move straight to how this relates with the stock market or the capital market more. You mentioned manufacturers. A lot of the manufacturing companies are actually listed on the Nigerian Stock Exchange. What did you find in your report in relation to these companies?
So this is what we found in our report, that we really need to take this back in time. In the 60s, around their independence, companies like Cadbury, companies like Nestle, and companies like Nigerian Breweries, and even Guinness, when they came to Nigeria just around the independence, some of these companies came just before independence, some came after independence. For them, Nigeria was a trading outpost. So all they came to do in Nigeria was to trade, import and sell. And then the Nigerian story became more and more interesting. So they found out that to compete effectively here, to take a larger market share here, they just couldn't take Nigeria as a trading outpost. They needed to set up on ground.
And they became manufacturing
and they became manufacturing
But over time became listed on the stock exchange.
And over time they became listed on the stock exchange as a result of the petrodollar booms and other factors. When, we had luck on our side at some point in our history.
And how does that now connect with the AFCFTA that is now here with us? Because this is something that has really been clamored for since way back 1960 or thereabouts.
Good. So let's look at the good old sardines we've eaten in Nigeria.
Which comes from Morocco.
Which comes from Morocco. Thank you very much, Temple. So that sardine has come, we grew up eating that sardine from Morocco. And what has it been? Nigeria has been a trading outpost for the sardine company for decades. But what happens with the AFCTA, which means that you take away the customs barrier and it can come in duty-free into Nigeria, not as if we've ever made our own sardines anyway. So it's not like we're going to lose market share for homemade sardines to that one. So it comes in here, and it comes, for we consumers, it becomes cheaper because we no longer, the company no longer has to pay duties to get into Nigeria. So for we consumers, it becomes cheaper. And when it becomes cheaper for consumers, because there's a consumer side of things, there's an upside for consumers. When it becomes cheaper, that means that company can afford to sell more in Nigeria. And when they sell more in Nigeria, then they can now begin to say to themselves that Nigeria should be more than a trading post. We should actually set up base in Nigeria. And because Nigeria has the largest market in Africa, even the so-called, where we say the Nigerian market is poor and the bottom of the pyramid market is poor, the reality is that even the so-called middle class is larger than the entire population of South Africa. So our market still represents some significant upsides. Then these companies like the Cadburys and Nestle's and Nigerian Breweries and Guinness that came to Nigeria in the 60s, the big African companies that come into Nigeria can say to themselves that want to expand beyond trading in Nigeria, want to start manufacturing, and going into the long term, they say to themselves, we want to now set up base and give us a pseudo-Nigerian look and list on the Nigerian Stock Exchange.
You see that being possible?
Yes, MTN just listed.
Okay.
So we're now having a second generation of companies that came into Nigeria a decade or two ago. They've found the Nigerian market has turned out to be good for them, and they're now listing. So MTN is the first when it comes to an African company. Airtel is also listing. Came to Nigeria much less after MTN, and they've also found out that, okay, we can actually have deeper roots in the Nigerian economy by listing our stock exchange. Now, one upside we always tend to forgo when we always think to ourselves that Nigeria becomes a dumping ground, it's a two-way deal. So Nigeria could become a dumping ground, but other countries could also become a dumping ground for Nigerian manufacturers. So what this means is that we need to raise our game as a country and as economic agents in the country. We need to raise our game. We need to learn that we will have to compete more effectively and internationally. So the question is, the products I'm making, is it just good enough for the Nigerian market, or is it good enough for out of Nigeria? And let me tell you a story about a company that's not even listed on the stock exchange, the British American Tobacco, right? BAT. So BAT,
they were listed before.
They were listed when they were a Nigerian tobacco company, then they delisted when British American took over, and So British American Tobacco had, the Ibadan factory, and then they have all sorts of factories across West Africa and East Africa. Now, the Nigerian factory was performing maybe at 50 to 60% capacity utilization. The other factories across the regions were operating at maybe 30 to 40%. What did they do? They shut down many of the factories. It came to Nigeria, consolidated on Nigeria, raised Nigeria's capacity utilization to between 95 to 100%.
So, Jimmy, we're running out of time. But here's the point. This week, Moody's rating agency, a rating agency like yours, also released a statement from one of the vice presidents saying that this is good for Africa, it's good for Nigeria, the fact that Nigeria is signing. But the point is, we still have some issues with logistics, we still have some issues with power. And so do you think with all of this, it will still be possible to get some other companies from other African countries to come list in the Nigerian Stock Exchange? Is it possible?
Yes,
or do you think they will consider Ghana, because Ghana in recent time has actually been attracting more FDIs than even FPIs? And we see a lot of Nigerian companies still going to Ghana to go and get their businesses done, given the power issues that we have.
It's give and take. So we have companies going there, we also have companies coming here. I mean, Casapreco, talking of Ghana, Casapreco as a company only arrived when it came to Nigeria. Casapreco would always have been and also run if it had always remained in Ghana. But the company story changed after it arrived in Nigeria. And it started giving big Nigerian companies a run for their money, right? So Nigeria would always represent that major upside as a result of our market size. And to complete the BAT story, today BAT is manufacturing for the rest of West and Central Africa, WECA region, from Nigeria. So they've been able to shut down factories across the region and been able to increase their production capacity in Nigeria. So what that means is that the likes of Unilever may say, okay, we'll manufacture this product in Ghana, and because Nigeria has better upside on that product in Nigeria, then we'll manufacture for Nigeria. And then people can look at themselves as, regional entities rather than Nigerian entities. The important thing is we must be able to compete, and we must be ready to compete. Competition never hurts the consumers. Consumers never lose where companies are competing. That is the essence and DNA of capitalism. When you lose your competitive ability, then you're no longer a capitalist nation. You can become a socialist nation or communist nation. And then we always see what happens at the end of the day with communist or socialist countries.
So for you, you think the focus will be more on the Nigerian stock markets rather than the fixed income and the fact that we have bonds, treasury bills, that's, as well as commercial papers at the FMDQ, where a lot of these companies are even leveraging now?
It depends on how we want to play. The skies are open. How high do we want to go within those skies? Remember back in the days under Soludo, when we're talking of Lagos as being some form of financial capital, not just for Nigeria, but for the rest of Africa. I mean, there are no rules that say that companies that want to either list, you can have other African companies listing on Nigerian Stock Exchange, the way Oando is listed in South Africa. Neither are there rules that says that we cannot raise capital, either bond or equities, for Nigeria or other companies.
Instead, those rules are now beginning to come to play, kind of.
I think
we're beginning to introduce them, cross-border listing.
Exactly. I think we
Airtel, I think it's headquartered in Kenya, Airtel Africa,
exactly.
And now it's coming to list in the Nigerian Stock Exchange, even though we have some delays right now, and of course. But in terms of regulations, I know that the Nigerian Stock Exchange and a couple of West African markets, the BRVM, Ghana Stock Exchange, and a few others, basically, because some of these African countries really don't have exchanges, actually. So the point is they were trying to set up WACMIC, some kind of West African Markets Integration Council and all of that. So I'm not sure that has actually been fully established. But you think this will be time with the introduction of AFCFTA for them to, leverage that, bring it to life and all that?
I think what the AFCTA does is that it opens up so many aspects of the economy, even beyond just the capital markets. We could list companies here. It opens up the aviation. It reduces the barriers of trade between and amongst African countries. The playing field is bigger. What that means is that when the playing field gets bigger, and the rules need to change. So we need to relax some of our rules, and rather than just think Nigeria, we need to think global, starting from Africa. When Muritala Mohammed was president, head of state, the foreign policy rule then was that Africa will be the strategic focus in terms of foreign policy.
Yeah.
So we need to integrate foreign policy with trade policy.
So some reforms need to play
Yes,
out.
some reforms need to play
From
out.
the policymakers, from the fiscal authorities,
exactly.
to the monetary authorities,
Yes.
and perhaps the stock exchange and the capital market at large.
Yes.
Jimmy Ogubine, Head of Research at Augusto & Complex. Time up. We need to take this break, but thank you for your time. We appreciate your time and this insight you've just provided.
Thank you.
Let's go on this short break. We'll be back with some news. Welcome back to the show. It's Capital Market here on Channels Television. Let's feed you with some news. The chairman of the newly inaugurated Securities and Exchange Commission, Mr. Olufemi Lijadu, this week called for a more orderly securities market in order to attract more investors into Nigeria. Mr. Lijadu made the comments during the board's first meeting on Thursday, where he stressed the need for a capital market where rules are enforced and investments are well protected. Mr. Lijadu also promises that the new board will work swiftly to ensure a capital market that Nigerians will be proud of by reinforcing public trust. And over 650 participants from more than 60 firms today participated in a 5-kilometer marathon, an initiative of the Nigerian Stock Exchange aimed at creating awareness on the early detection of cancer. The one-day marathon, referred to as NSE Corporate Challenge, which is in its 6th edition, also aims to raise funds to support the fight against the disease. At the Fun-filled event, the Nigerian Stock Exchange announced the donation of 20 million naira to the cause, in addition to about 63 million naira already raised from the past 5 editions.
The Nigerian Stock Exchange Corporate Challenge is, like you said, is a medium where the stock exchange rallies corporates to support a fight against cancer. And today we are here again to join the stock exchange in the 5-kilometer e-race, as it is called.
Imagine if we built a proper health insurance system that covered everybody. A little contribution from each person as employed, whether you're in the private sector, in the public sector, or in the informal sector, can build billions of naira that can be used to build cancer centers that people can then get routine screening as part of their medical checkup and help to prevent the incidence of cancer. Because once it comes up, most people find out when it's already too late, and that's a shame, unfortunately.
We don't have the final numbers for today, so we're not sure what the number is. But from the 5 previous editions, we've raised net after all the expenses about 63 million naira. We believe that we're going to do a lot more this year, but we don't have all the numbers in yet.
Beside the 20 million that the stock exchange is?
No, the 20 million we gave is new. That's new. So the number I gave you does not include that.
Oscar Yema, the Chief Executive of the Stock Exchange, and of course a couple of other participants in the race today, CEO of AfriInvest and of course the CEO of Stanbic IBTC Holdings. While the much-awaited capital-raising exercise of Sovereign Trust Insurance PLC has now commenced via rights issue of some 4.17 billion ordinary shares of 50 kobo each at 50 kobo per share. According to the prospectus, the provisional allotment is in the proportion of 1 new ordinary share for every 2 ordinary shares of 50 kobo held as at the close of business on Tuesday, January the 15th, 2019. In line with the Securities and Exchange Commission rules, shareholders of the CSCS accounts will be credited not less than 15 days from the date based of allotment, as ordinary shares not taken up by July the 31st, 2019 will be allotted on a pro rata basis. The exercise, which kicked off on June the 24th, will lapse on July the 31st, 2019. Well, it's no longer clear when the shares of Airtel Africa will be listed on the Nigerian Stock Exchange, as the issuer is yet to put finishing touches to some post-NSE approval requirements. The Chief Executive of the exchange, Mr. Oscar Nyema, and the Managing Director of Airtel Nigeria, Mr. Segun Ogunsoya, at the pre-listing market briefing highlighted procedural demands as the reason for the delay.
We just have some procedural papers to just complete. I'm sure they'll be completed today. If you complete them quickly enough today, I'm not sure whether the other processes can be completed, but all the processes are in place. One or two things to be completed by close of business today. Once those are completed, we would, list, very probably on Monday.
You need to have all the pieces of information together. There are processes at the back end that need to happen before we're actually ready to list and trade. So please, I hope we've given you enough clarity and that we would be announcing appropriately when the time is right. This is not the first dual listing we have with London Stock Exchange, but the difference here is that the London Stock Exchange in this particular listing is a primary market, and the Nigerian Stock Exchange is the secondary market, whereas with the SEPLAT listing, it was the other way around. Nigeria was primary and London was secondary. And just as we did to establish fungibility between both markets, there's been extensive work done in the background from a post-trade perspective to ensure that there is fungibility.
Well, the Stock Exchange of Mauritius has announced the inclusion of African Export-Import Bank, that's Afreximbank, in the SEM10 index. The index tracks the performance of the 10 largest stocks on the Stock Exchange of Mauritius in terms of market capitalization and the 10 most liquid stocks in terms of average value traded and trading frequency during the preceding 3 months. Being part of the SEM10 index is expected to enhance Afreximbank's visibility with local and international investors and potentially encourage institutional investors that track the index to include the bank's depository receipts in their investment portfolios. 90% of foreign investors' transactions on SEM-listed stocks are targeted towards companies that are included in the SEM10 index. Now, the Nairobi derivatives market has now gone live on the Nairobi Stock Exchange of Kenya. Transactions kicked off on Thursday, July the 4th, following the receipt of operational license from market regulators, that's the Capital Markets Authority and the Central Bank of Kenya. Now, the derivative market is the second in sub-Saharan Africa after the Johannesburg markets. Trading involves single stock futures of the most traded companies on the exchange, including Safaricom, Equity Holdings, and KCB Group. The platform also trades equity index futures ahead of other derivatives introduction like forward contracts and swaps. But quite a lot for you to watch out for next week. The Acting Director General of the Securities and Exchange Commission, Ms. Mary Uduk, will be made a member of the Chartered Institute of Stockbrokers. And of course, a whole lot that will transpire in the market. So you should watch out for all of this and the way they'll play out here on the Channels Television, the news leader. On that note, it's a wrap on the program. That's it for this weekend. Thanks for watching. I'm Temple Ashaju. I'll see you next time. Bye for now.